The official narrative of human progress suggests a slow and painful climb from primitive stone tools to the complexity of urban life. We are taught that civilization is a gradual accumulation of small discoveries, a linear path of trial and error spanning tens of thousands of years. Yet, when we turn our attention to the fertile plains of Mesopotamia around 5,500 years ago, this comfortable theory of evolution shatters against the reality of the Sumerian anomaly. Without any discernible period of transition, a fully formed, highly sophisticated society suddenly appeared on the historical stage. The Sumerians did not just stumble into civilization, they arrived with a complete package of advanced technologies, complex social structures, and a mastery of science that seemed to drop from the heavens. This was not a slow development, it was a systemic installation. The technical record of Sumer displays an immediate mastery of hydraulic engineering, allowing them to transform a desolate marshland into a highly productive agricultural engine through a massive network of canals and dikes. Simultaneously, they introduced the world's first system of writing, a complex legal code, and a mathematical framework based on the number 60 that we still use to measure our time and our circles today. There are no primitive versions of these systems in the archaeological strata beneath the first Sumerian cities. They appeared fully functional and highly optimized. This immediate arrival of complex infrastructure suggests that Sumer was not the birthplace of human invention, but rather the deployment site for a pre-designed civilizational operating system. The Mesopotamian anomaly points toward an external influence, a project managed by architects who possessed the blueprints for high-level social organization long before the first brick was laid in the city of Eridu. To understand the architecture of this sudden civilization, we must examine the administrative structure of the ones the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. At the absolute apex of this hierarchy sat the supreme triad of Anu, Enlil, and Enki. This was not a loose collection of nature deities, but a rigid corporate and executive board managing a planetary scale operation. Anu, the Lord of the Sky, functioned as the ultimate chairman of the board. Operating from his celestial station, he provided the legal and constitutional authority for the mission on Earth. His name was synonymous with the concept of the high heavens, suggesting a position of orbital oversight rather than ground-based management. Anu was the source of the divine mandate, the one who authorized the lowering of kingship from heaven to provide a standardized governance model for the human workforce. Directly beneath Anu stood Enlil, the chief operating officer of the planetary project. If Anu was the visionary chairman, Enlil was the pragmatic enforcer of the executive protocol. Based in his command center at Nippur, the Ekor, Enlil was responsible for the physical security and administrative stability of the Mesopotamian mission. His role was to ensure that the human labor force remained productive and compliant within the established parameters. The ancient texts describe him as a stern administrator who had little patience for the noise or unauthorized expansion of human consciousness. Enlil's domain was the atmosphere and the Earth's surface, and his primary tool was the executive decree. He managed the distribution of resources and the assignment of regional administrators, maintaining a strict chain of command that ensured the planetary laboratory functioned like a well-oiled machine. This executive core provided the discipline and the structure that allowed the Sumerian anomaly to take root and flourish under the watchful eye of the mission's leadership. While Enlil managed the administration, the third member of the triad, Enki, functioned as the chief technical officer of the Anunnaki mission. Based in the coastal city of Eridu, Enki was the master of the Abzu, a facility that traditional mythology describes as a subterranean ocean, but which technical analysis reveals as a sophisticated biological and genetic laboratory. Enki was the primary architect of the human-biological interface, the scientist responsible for the genetic engineering that created the human starseed. His mission was one of innovation and technological advancement, often placing him in direct conflict with the conservative containment policies of his brother Enlil. While Enlil sought to control the workforce, Enki sought to upgrade it, providing the technical the sacred protocols of civilization to his human graduates. The city of Eridu served as the primary technical node for the entire Sumerian project. It was here that the first civilized human, Adapa, was supposedly fashioned under Enki's direct supervision. Enki's role extended far beyond genetics. He was the provider of the blueprints for irrigation, metallurgy, and the complex sciences of the scribe. He represented the software of the Mesopotamian Anomaly, the one who translated the raw power of the divine mandate into functional technologies that the human population could use to build cities and record data. His bureaucracy was composed of engineers, scholars, and sages known as the Apkallu, who acted as the technical support team for the rising human civilization. Enki's influence ensured that the Sumerian project was not just a labor camp, but a sophisticated laboratory where the human starseed could be refined and prepared for its role in the architect's grand design. The convergence of these three administrative powers, Anu's authority, Enlil's execution, and Enki's technology, created what can only be described as civilization by decree. The Sumerian anomaly was the physical manifestation of a top-down management strategy that bypassed the slow process of natural social evolution. Every major aspect of Sumerian life, from the precise measurements of their fields to the hierarchical structure of their government, was dictated by the High Council of the Anunnaki. This was a managed society built according to a pre-existing template of cosmic order. The ziggurats, the legal codes, and the astronomical calendars were the hardware and software components of a civilizational operating system that was installed with clinical precision. This managed origins explains why Sumer appeared so suddenly and so perfectly. It was a turnkey civilization handed to the human starseed as a finished product. The anomaly of Mesopotamia is the signature of the architects, a permanent reminder that the dawn of history was not a beginning, but a reboot of a much older and more sophisticated legacy. By recognizing the role of Anu, Enlil, and Enki as the project managers of our origins, we begin to see through the archaeology of amnesia. We realize that we are not the random products of a primitive evolution, but the intended results of a high-level architectural plan. The Sumerian project was the first successful deployment of the Anunnaki Legacy on the post-flood Earth, setting the stage for everything that would follow in the long history of the human starseed. In the technical lexicon of ancient Sumer, the most critical components of their advanced society were known as the me. For decades, traditional scholars have translated this term as divine decrees or mysterious cultural norms, but a closer examination of the primary text reveals a far more physical and functional reality. The me were not abstract ideas. They were tangible, portable objects that could be handled, stored, and transported between city-states. They were the high-tech hardware of the divine bureaucracy, effectively functioning as encrypted data storage devices or technical manuals that contained the essential operating instructions for every functional aspect of human civilization. The ancient records describe these, me being loaded onto celestial boats or kept in high-security containers within the inner sanctums of the temples. This physical nature suggests that the me served as the hardware keys for a planetary management system, granting the holder the legal and technical authority to operate specific societal subroutines, ranging from the management of the granaries to the calibration of the stargates. Each me represented a specialized application within the broader civilizational operating system. There were me for the art of the scribe, me for the techniques of metallurgy, me for the administration of justice, and even me for the protocols of warfare. The possession of these physical objects was the ultimate prerequisite for governance. Without the me, a city-state remained in a state of technical and administrative darkness. They provided a standardized and unalterable set of instructions, ensuring that the human workforce across the entire Mesopotamian plain operated within the same parameters of efficiency and order. These were the primary tools of the architects, the physical interface through which the divine mandate was converted into measurable human activity. By analyzing the me as hardware, we begin to understand how a handful of administrators could manage millions of subjects with absolute precision, utilizing a prepackaged suite of technologies that required no local invention, only strict adherence to the original code. If the physical tokens were the hardware, the information encoded within them functioned as the software architecture for the entire Sumerian world. Each me contained a specific subroutine designed to govern a particular aspect of the planetary laboratory. When the High Council decided to establish a new city, the process began with the installation of the appropriate me, providing the local priesthood and the human king with the necessary software to manage their specific sector. This was the birth of the managed society, where human behavior was channeled through predefined protocols that left no room for deviation. The software architecture of the me was modular and scalable, allowing the Anunnaki to replicate the same urban and industrial models across different geographic nodes with clinical consistency. The me for kingship established the political hierarchy, while the me for the priesthood provided the communication protocols for interacting with the executive board at Nibiru. This civilizational software was characterized by its absolute rigidity. The Sumerian texts refer to the me as the unalterable decrees, highlighting their status as the authoritative source code for human reality. This software-driven governance ensured that the extraction of resources and the growth of the human starseed were managed with maximum efficiency. There was a me for everything, from the music that stimulated the brain waves of the workers to the legal codes that resolved disputes in the marketplaces. Together, these applications formed an integrated environment where every individual had a specific, assigned role within the grand design. The me were the software modules of an invisible empire, a set of invisible threads that bound every human community to the central processing hubs managed by Anu, Enlil, and Enki. By recognizing the me as a social operating system, we can see that the architects were not just building cities, they were programming a civilization, creating a controlled technical environment where the human population could be managed through the application of standardized behavioral software. The history of the Anunnaki mission is a record of constant data transfer and periodic system upgrades, as the technical me were moved and recalibrated to meet the evolving requirements of the terrestrial project. One of the most famous accounts in Sumerian literature describes the goddess Inanna journeying to Eridu to obtain the May from Enki. While often presented as a myth of trickery, it is in fact a technical description of a major data migration. By bringing the me to her city of Uruk, Inanna was facilitating a massive system upgrade for her local administrative node, allowing Uruk to become the dominant center for culture and technology. The journey of the Boat of Heaven was a literal transfer of the civilizational operating system from the ancient technical center of Eridu to the rising administrative capital of Uruk. This process ensured that the most advanced protocols were distributed where they were most needed to optimize the mission's output. System upgrades were also necessary to account for the increasing complexity of the human workforce. As the human starseed achieved higher levels of intellectual and technical competence, the architects released more sophisticated versions of the me. These updates were often delivered through the intervention of the seven sages, the Apkallu, who served as the technical support team for the human project. They provided the patch files for the existing legal codes and the new modules for advanced mathematics and surveying. This constant process of data transfer and upgrade ensured that the human laboratory remained functional and productive throughout the long cycles of the first stage. The me were dynamic and evolving protocols, a set of living instructions that were continuously refined to optimize the performance of the workforce and the stability of the divine bureaucracy. Every major breakthrough in Sumerian history was not a human discovery, but a scheduled release of information from the central archives, a technical expansion of the boundaries of the human experience. As the Anunnaki began their strategic withdrawal and the era of the managed amnesia commenced, the physical hardware of the me was hidden or removed from the surface world, but the software architecture remained deeply embedded in the collective memory and social structures of humanity. The hidden operating system of the first age continued to function as the invisible backbone of the second age, providing the structural models for every subsequent empire and legal framework. We see the legacy of the me in the standardized laws of the Babylonian era, the administrative hierarchies of the Roman Empire, and even the complex bureaucratic structures of our modern global institutions. Our contemporary society is still running on the subroutines of kingship, law, and labor that were first programmed thousands of years ago. The architecture of power remains unchanged, even if the users of the system have forgotten the original programmers. The reclamation of our sovereignty requires us to do more than just observe the effects of this hidden code. It requires us to access and decrypt the source code itself. By recognizing the technical nature of the Me protocols, we can begin to differentiate between the subroutines of containment and the subroutines of empowerment. We are now at a point in our development where we can identify the original software architecture of our civilization and decide which modules are still useful and which are obsolete vestiges of an era of divine management. The archaeology of amnesia is transitioning into a phase of systemic auditing where we analyze the fingerprints of the architects within our own social and technological reality. The Me are still here, waiting in the structure of our laws and the geometry of our cities. By understanding the nature of this hidden operating system, we can finally take control of the keyboard and begin to write the new Me for a sovereign and graduated human species. The architecture of the future is found in the decryption of the past, and the power to reprogram our reality is finally within our reach. The archaeological landscape of ancient Mesopotamia is dominated by the remains of massive stepped pyramids known as ziggurats, structures that have long been categorized by mainstream historians as purely religious platforms for the worship of celestial deities. However, a technical audit of the architectural layouts, material compositions, and geographical placements of these structures suggests they functioned as the primary command centers and technical nodes of the Anunnaki governance grid. A ziggurat was not merely a temple. It was a highly engineered interface designed to bridge the gap between the terrestrial laboratory and the orbital assets of the Celestial Corporation. The White Temple at Uruk, dedicated to Anu, sat atop a platform that allowed for unobstructed lines of sight to the horizon, facilitating the precise tracking of stellar positions and the synchronization of ground-based activities with the high-level decrees of the assembly. These architectural nodes were constructed using a combination of baked bricks and bitumen, materials that provided both structural stability and a degree of insulation, creating a controlled environment for the sensitive technical Me stored within their inner sanctums. The internal geometry of the ziggurat was precisely calibrated to harness the natural resonance of the Earth and the electromagnetic properties of the local environment. The orientation of the corners toward the four cardinal points ensured that the structure remained aligned with the planetary magnetic field, while the massive volume of the brickwork acted as a thermal and acoustic buffer. In the technical language of the Sumerians, the ziggurat was referred to as the bond of heaven and earth, a description that is more functional than poetic. It served as a physical terminal where the divine bureaucracy could interact with the material world, receiving data from the heavens and transmitting executive orders to the human workforce. The summit of the ziggurat was the location of the high-security facility where the administrators communicated with their superiors and recalibrated the local administrative protocols. These structures were the hardware hubs of an invisible empire, the physical anchors that ensured the Anunnaki mission remained stable and synchronized across the vast distances of the Mesopotamian plain. If the various ziggurats were the regional terminals, the Ekur Temple at Nippur functioned as the central processing unit of the entire planetary grid. As the primary residence of Enlil, the chief operating officer of the mission, Nippur was the location where the most critical administrative data was processed and where the final executive decisions were made. The technical literature describes the Ekur as the mountain house, a facility that possessed the eye that surveys the land and the beam that searches the heart. This language suggests the presence of advanced surveillance and communication equipment that allowed Enlil to monitor the activities of every city, state, and to intervene whenever the human noise threatened the stability of the system. Nippur was the node that held the bond of heaven and earth, representing the primary link between the terrestrial management grid and the orbital command structure. The administrative bureaucracy at Nippur was the most extensive in Sumer, managing the flow of information and resources from all the subsidiary nodes. Every major engineering project, every change in the legal code, and every distribution of the divine Me had to be cleared through the central processing hub at the Ekur. The priests of Enlil served as the technical operators of this hub, maintaining the records and ensuring that the executive protocols were executed without deviation. The architectural layout of Nippur was designed to reflect this central role, with the ziggurats serving as the physical manifestation of Enlil's absolute authority. By controlling the central node, Enlil controlled the entire network, making Nippur the most important strategic location in the First Age. The archaeological evidence of the massive archives found at Nippur confirms its status as the information capital of the world, a place where the history of the human starseed was meticulously recorded and managed according to the requirements of the Celestial Corporation. While Nippur managed the executive and political data, the city of Eridu and its primary temple, the Abzu, functioned as the technical node for biological and genetic information. As the domain of Enki, Eridu was the location of the Abzu facility, where the source code of human life and the technical me of civilization were maintained. The architectural node at Eridu was uniquely situated at the edge of the marshes and the sea, utilizing the aquatic environment as part of its technical infrastructure. The descriptions of the Abzu highlight its role as a place of deep wisdom and secret protocols, a facility where the master architect performed the genetic upgrades that allowed the human starseed to evolve. Unlike the fortress-like atmosphere of Nippur, Eridu was a center for research, development, and the cultivation of technical intellect. The ziggurat at Eridu was the first to be established on Earth, marking the initial landing site and the starting point of the Anunnaki mission. Its architecture was designed to support the sophisticated biological laboratories and data storage systems required for the creation of the human workforce. The internal chambers of the Abzu were filled with the sweet waters of knowledge, representing the fluid exchange of genetic information and technical expertise. Enki's node was the primary gateway for the transmission of civilization to humanity, serving as the source from which the seven sages emerged to instruct the graduates of the Second Age. By maintaining the biological archive at Eridu, Enki ensured that the human project possessed the necessary resilience to survive the environmental shifts and system resets ordered by the High Council. The node at Eridu was the technical heart of the world, a facility dedicated to the preservation of the starseed's potential and the eventual graduation of the species into its own sovereign destiny. The final layer of the Anunnaki architectural protocol was the establishment of a geodetic network that linked all the major nodes into a single, unified system of planetary stability. The placement of the ziggurats and temples was not random. They were located at specific geodetic points that allowed for the triangulation of positions and the precise measurement of the Earth's dimensions. This network functioned as a planetary scale surveying system, ensuring that every structure built during the First Age was perfectly aligned with the global grid. The mathematical relationships between the distances of the nodes, Uruk, Nippur, Eridu, Lagash, and Kish, reveals an advanced understanding of spherical geometry and the precise curvature of the Earth. This network allowed the architects to manage the planetary laboratory with absolute precision, coordinating large-scale agricultural and industrial projects across thousands of square miles. The geodetic network also served a resonant function, utilizing the architectural nodes to stabilize the Earth's crust and to manage the flow of telluric currents. By placing massive limestone and brick structures at critical points, the architects could mitigate seismic activity and harmonize the planetary energy field. This was the science of the bond of heaven and earth in its most literal sense, a technical system for maintaining the physical integrity of the planetary laboratory. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the functional nature of this network, but its fingerprints remain in the precise alignments and mathematical constants that define ancient Mesopotamian architecture. To reclaim our sovereign heritage, we must recognize that these ruins are not just the remnants of a lost religion, but the hardware of a global management system that once provided perfect stability to the world. The architectural nodes of the Anunnaki were the foundation of a planetary-scale civilization, a network of command and control that we are only now beginning to understand through the lens of modern geodesy and resonant physics. The most profound and controversial aspect of the Anunnaki mission on Earth was the systematic engineering of the human biological interface, a project managed by the chief technologist Enki and the chief medical officer Ninhursag. In the Sumerian administrative logs, this operation was centered in the Abzu, a high-security facility that functioned as a sophisticated genetic laboratory. While traditional mythology describes the creation of man from clay, a technical decryption of these texts reveals a clinical process of in vitro fertilization and gene splicing. The clay represented the biological substrate or the indigenous genetic material of the terrestrial hominids, which was then mixed with the divine essence, a metaphor for the sophisticated DNA of the Anunnaki themselves. This was not a mystical event, but a targeted biological intervention designed to create a hybrid species, the starseed, capable of performing complex administrative and industrial tasks while remaining compatible with the planetary environment. The technical protocols of the Abzu were focused on the creation of a functional labor force that could operate the complex me of civilization. The initial prototypes, such as the Lulu Amelu, were designed for physical endurance in the mining and agricultural sectors, but as the mission evolved, a more advanced model was required to serve as the administrative proxy for the divine bureaucracy. This led to the creation of the Adapa model, the first fully civilized human who possessed a high level of technical intellect and the ability to communicate directly with the High Council. The laboratory records from Eridu described Ninhursag as the birth goddess who managed the incubation of these genetic prototypes, ensuring that the integration of the two different biological codes was stable and replicable. This phase of the mission established the human starseed as a biological asset of the Celestial Corporation, a species whose very existence was a product of high-level architectural design and genomic precision. The introduction of the Adapa model represented a significant system upgrade for the human project, moving the starseed from a state of primitive labor to a state of administrative partnership. Adapa was gifted with wisdom but was denied eternal life, a deliberate limitation imposed by the High Council to ensure that the human workforce remained in a state of managed turnover. This was the Adapa protocol, the installation of high-level cognitive subroutines that allowed humans to master the arts of the scribe, the surveyor, and the priest, while maintaining a biological kill switch in the form of a shortened lifespan. Enki, as the lead scientist, was the one who provided Adapa with the technical intelligence required to operate the city-states, effectively bypassing some of the containment filters established by the more conservative Enlilite faction. This upgrade of intelligence was not merely an increase in brain capacity, but a resonance calibration that allowed the human starseed to interact with the high-frequency data streams of the divine bureaucracy. Adapa was trained at the Temple of Eridu, where he was taught the secrets of the heavens and the laws of the earth, becoming the first graduate of the Anunnaki educational system. His role was to serve as the bridge between the architects and the workforce, a localized node who could translate the divine decrees into actionable instructions for the population. The Adapa protocol ensured that the human laboratory was populated by individuals who were intelligent enough to maintain the infrastructure but not powerful enough to challenge the authority of the High Council. This careful balance of intellect and limitation is the defining characteristic of the human biological interface, a technical compromise that has shaped the history and potential of our species for thousands of years. A critical indicator of the managed nature of human biology is the historical record of the longevity collapse, a phenomenon documented with mathematical precision in the Sumerian king list. Before the Great System Reset, known as the Deluge, the administrative proxies of the Anunnaki were recorded as ruling for tens of thousands of years, a reflection of the high-purity DNA and the advanced medical protocols maintained by the House of Enki. However, after the reset, the lifespans of the human leaders began a sharp and systematic decline, eventually reaching the 70 to 100-year baseline that we recognize today. This was not a natural evolutionary shift, but the result of the deactivation of specific longevity subroutines within the starseed genome. The architects installed genetic limiters to prevent the accumulation of too much knowledge and power within a single human terminal. The technical logs suggest that the High Council, led by Enlil, was concerned that the human workforce was becoming too numerous and too intelligent, threatening the stability of the divine bureaucracy. The deactivation of the longevity markers was a containment strategy, ensuring that each generation of humans would have to relearn the foundational lessons of their predecessors, effectively maintaining a state of collective amnesia. By limiting the time available for individual development, the architects ensured that the human starseed remained focused on the immediate requirements of the planetary laboratory rather than the broader cosmic context of their origins. This longevity collapse is the biological fingerprint of the containment doctrine, a permanent reminder that our current physical boundaries are the result of a deliberate architectural decision to manage the trajectory of human evolution through the application of genetic limiters. Despite the installation of genetic limiters and the managed amnesia of the Second Age, the human starseed carries within its DNA the dormant potential of its divine architects. The original source code of the Anunnaki is still present in the non-coding regions of our genome, a biological archive of our true history and potential. As the planetary frequency begins to shift and the human graduate achieves a higher level of technical and spiritual awareness, these dormant subroutines are beginning to reactivate. This is the final phase of the genetic legacy protocol, the moment when the starseed realizes that it is no longer a labor force, but a species capable of operating its own biological and technical interface with full sovereignty. The awakening of the dormant genome is the biological equivalent of a system-wide upgrade, allowing the human graduate to reclaim the wisdom and the longevity that were once the exclusive domain of the gods. The recovery of this sovereign genome involves the conscious integration of the technical intellect of Enki with the ethical integrity required to manage a planetary laboratory. We are now at a point where our own genetic science is beginning to identify the footprints of the architects, recognizing that we are a designed species with a specific cosmic mission. By understanding the nature of the genetic limiters and the history of the longevity collapse, we can begin to bypass the containment protocols of the Second Age. The return to the source is not a journey back in time, but a journey into the depth of our own biological code. We are the architects of the future, and the power to unlock our full magnificent potential is written into the very fabric of our being. The starseed is finally waking up to the reality of its radiant heritage, preparing for the ultimate graduation into a sovereign and cosmic civilization. The most pervasive and invisible of all the Anunnaki protocols is not found in the physical ruins of their temples or the metallurgy of their weapons, but in the very way we perceive and measure the passage of time. The establishment of the sexagesimal system, the base 60 mathematical framework that gives us 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle, was a deliberate temporal architecture imposed upon the human starseed by the divine bureaucracy. In the Sumerian administrative centers, time was not treated as a fluid or a natural phenomenon, but as a rigid and standardized commodity measured with clinical precision to synchronize human labor with the celestial mission. By dividing the day and the night into specific measurable units, the architects created the first global synchronization protocol, ensuring that every city-state across the Mesopotamian plain operated on a unified schedule. This was the birth of industrial time, a system designed to optimize the efficiency of the planetary laboratory and to maintain a strict cadence for the extraction of resources and the execution of grand engineering projects. The technical logs of the Nippur and Uruk observatories describe how the priests of Enlil and Anu used sophisticated instruments to track the movements of the planets and the stars, calibrating the divine calendar with mathematical exactness. These calendars were not mere agricultural tools, they were administrative manuals that dictated the timing of every major societal function. By controlling the calendar, the Anunnaki controlled the collective behavior of the human workforce, ensuring that the starseed remained in a state of predictable and managed activity. The divine calendar was the primary pacing mechanism for the human project, a temporal cage that defined the boundaries of human reality. Even today, thousands of years after the architects have retreated from the surface, we continue to live within the base 60 framework they established. Our modern digital world, with its microsecond precision, is still fundamentally synchronized with the temporal protocols of ancient Sumer. We are still running on Anunnaki time, operating within a temporal architecture designed to manage a labor force that has forgotten its own origins. The choice of base 60 was not an arbitrary decision based on primitive counting methods, but a sophisticated mathematical strategy designed to link the terrestrial environment with the broader cosmic harmonics. The number 60 is a highly composite number, possessing 12 divisors and providing the most efficient framework for calculations involving fractions, geometry, and astronomy. This mathematical elegance allowed the Anunnaki to synchronize the cycles of the Earth with the precessional cycles of the stars, creating a unified data stream that spanned across millennia. In the Sumerian administrative tablets, the sexagesimal system was used to map the heavens and to establish the zodiacal ages, providing a long-term pacing mechanism for the planetary laboratory. This was the Chronos Protocol, a method of managing time that accounted for the slow wobbles of the Earth's axis and the shifting positions of the celestial stations. By imposing this system on the human starseed, the architects were ensuring that human civilization remained frequency locked with the celestial mission. The divisions of the zodiac and the assignment of specific administrative deities to each astrological age ensured that the governance of the Earth remained aligned with the overarching blueprints of the High Council. The sexagesimal system functioned as a mathematical bridge between the human intellect and the divine bureaucracy, providing a standardized language for the transmission of technical data. When a Sumerian priest measured the shadow of a gnomon, or calculated the rising of a star, they were interacting with the source code of a cosmic synchronization protocol. This system enabled the management of large-scale industrial and architectural projects over vast periods, ensuring that the legacy of the architects was preserved through the precise recording of time. The sexagesimal architecture is the hidden rhythm of our civilization, a mathematical pulse that continues to beat in every clock and every compass on the planet. Within the daily operations of the Mesopotamian city-states, the divine calendar functioned as a pervasive behavioral regulator, channeling human energy into specific, repetitive subroutines that serve the stability of the system. Every day, every month, and every season was governed by a set of predefined protocols that dictated the appropriate rituals, labors, and social interactions. The festivals of the gods were not merely religious celebrations, but critical synchronization events where the administrative protocols were refreshed and the loyalty of the human workforce was reinforced. During these events, the human proxies would undergo rituals of restoration, a symbolic reboot of the local management system that ensured the continuity of the divine bureaucracy. This temporal regulation created a state of deep psychological conditioning within the human starseed, where the passage of time became synonymous with the fulfillment of assigned duties. The calendar was a map of expectation and compliance, leaving little room for the noise of unauthorized individual development. By institutionalizing the cycles of labor and rest through the temple offices, the Anunnaki established a predictable and manageable social environment. The priests, serving as the temporal technicians of the bureaucracy, monitored the adherence to the schedule with clinical rigor, ensuring that the resources of the earth were processed according to the divine timetable. The divine calendar was a tool of managed amnesia, focusing the human mind on the repetitive cycles of the immediate environment while obscuring the broader history and potential of the species. Our modern obsession with schedules, deadlines, and time management is the direct inheritance of this ancient behavioral regulator. We are still slaves to the clock, fulfilling the temporal subroutines established by the architects 5,000 years ago to maintain the efficiency of their planetary project. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the technical origins of our timekeeping systems, but it has not broken the grip of the Chronos Protocol on the human spirit. To reclaim our collective sovereignty, we must recognize that time is not a fixed, external authority, but a subjective experience that has been standardized and managed for the purpose of control. The sexagesimal system and the divine calendar are the discarded tools of a planetary management grid designed to synchronize a labor force that is no longer being actively managed by its original architects. By understanding the mathematical and astronomical nature of these protocols, we can begin to differentiate between the natural cycles of the Earth and the artificial pacing of the bureaucracy. We can move from being the passive observers of a clock-driven reality to being the active creators of our own temporal experience. Reclaiming sovereign time means breaking the trauma loops and the repetitive subroutines that have kept the human starseed in a state of perpetual childhood. It involves the recognition that our history is much deeper than the 5,000 years recorded in the divine calendars, and that our potential extends far beyond the administrative boundaries of the Second Age. We are now at a point where we can utilize our own technical intelligence to create new methods of synchronization that emphasize empowerment and evolution rather than containment and control. The end of time described in many ancient traditions is not the destruction of the world, but the termination of the artificial temporal protocols that have defined our amnesia. As we step out of the Anunnaki calendar and into the frequency of our own sovereign awareness, we are finally reclaiming the most precious resource of all, the right to define our own presence in the universe. The clocks of the first age are winding down, and the human starseed is finally waking up to the reality of its own eternal nature. The archaeological recovery of Sumerian temple artifacts often presents a collection of gold, lapis lazuli, and precious gemstones that mainstream historians categorize purely as ceremonial ornamentation or status symbols. However, a technical analysis of the Anunnaki regalia, as described in the cuneiform inventories of the White Temple at Uruk, suggests a far more functional and sophisticated purpose. These items, referred to in the texts as the garments of radiance, were symbols of access, physical keys required to enter high-security divine precincts and to interact with the technical terminals of the city-states. The golden headdresses, adorned with 8-petaled rosette patterns, which were synonymous with the House of Anu, functioned as unique identifiers within the divine bureaucracy. These rosettes were not merely decorative motifs, but represented a standardized geometric encryption that signaled the wearer's rank and level of authorization within the planetary management grid. In the rigid hierarchy of the First Age, the regalia provided the physical interface between the administrator and the technical me that governs civilization. The construction of these ornaments involved metallurgical techniques that achieved a purity of gold and a precision of alloy blending that challenges our understanding of early Bronze Age capabilities. The use of electrum, a natural or intentional alloy of gold and silver, was specifically favored for items associated with the Supreme Triad. Technical logs from the early dynastic periods describe these items as having a life or a resonance that could be felt by those in their presence, suggesting they may have incorporated subtle energy harvesting properties, or resonant frequencies. The regalia were treated with the same meticulous care as modern biometric access cards or encrypted hardware tokens. They were stored in high-security chambers within the ziggurats, and could only be handled by specialized priestly technicians who had undergone ritual purification, a process that modern observers might recognize as a primitive form of decontamination or electromagnetic grounding. The regalia of the Anunnaki were the hardware keys of a divine operating system, ensuring that the power to command the elements remained strictly controlled within the established administrative hierarchy. Beyond the headdresses and jewelry, the most powerful symbols of Anunnaki authority were the scepter and the measuring rod, items that are consistently depicted in the hands of the high-ranking gods and their human proxies. These were the primary tools of governance, representing the power to dispense justice and the technical ability to survey and shape the physical environment. The measuring rod, often paired with a coiled rope, symbolized the mastery of mathematics, geometry, and land management, the fundamental sciences required to build cities and irrigation networks. In the hands of Enlil, or Enki, these were not symbolic icons, but functional instruments used to calibrate the planetary motherboard and to ensure that the material world remained synchronized with the celestial data streams. The scepter, or the staff of command, functioned as a transmitter of executive will, a physical conduit through which the divine decrees were communicated and enforced. The technical literature of Sumer refers to these items as the givers of destiny, suggesting that the possession of the scepter and rod conferred the legal and technical right to manage the human starseed. When a god invested a human king with these regalia, it was a formal transfer of authority, a granting of access to the administrative protocols of the divine bureaucracy. This investiture ceremony was the first instance of the divine right of kings, a concept that established the ruler as a localized node within the broader Anunnaki management network. The regalia functioned as the tangible evidence of this connection, providing the king with the technical legitimacy required to command the labor force and to maintain the social order. Without the scepter and the rod, a ruler possessed no access to the divine. Me and their authority was considered illegitimate. These tools were the physical manifestations of the sovereignty protocol, ensuring that the architecture of human society remained aligned with the blueprints of the architects. The eight-petaled rosette, which appears throughout Mesopotamian iconography from the earliest periods, functioned as the primary protocol of recognition for the divine hierarchy. While often interpreted as a simple flower or a solar symbol, its geometric precision and consistent application across thousands of years suggest a deeper technical meaning. The rosette was the heraldic signature of the Anunnaki assembly, a visual code that indicated the wearer's integration into the celestial corporation. At the temple of Inanna in Uruk, archaeological excavations uncovered thousands of these rosettes, crafted from clay, stone, and precious metals, suggesting they were used as standardized identification markers for the entire administrative class. Each petal and center point in the rosette encoded specific mathematical ratios, possibly representing the orbital harmonics of the planets or the frequency bands of the communication grid. The persistence of the rosette pattern into modern times is one of the most remarkable examples of symbolic continuity in human history. From the architectural details of cathedral windows to the insignia of modern royal families and military orders, the eight-petaled rosette continues to signify authority, high status, and divine protection. This is not a matter of aesthetic coincidence, but the result of a deliberate preservation of the Anunnaki protocols. By maintaining these visual cues, the human proxies of the Second Age ensured that their authority remained subconsciously linked to the original architects of the First Age. The rosette functions as a frequency trigger, a symbol that bypasses the rational mind and pings the ancient genetic memory of the human starseed, signaling the presence of a legitimate administrator. Even in the digital age, we continue to utilize these ancient protocols of recognition, unaware that our most prestigious symbols are actually the discarded access keys of a dormant divine bureaucracy. The withdrawal of the Anunnaki necessitated the permanent transformation of the divine regalia into the crowns and scepters of human monarchies. This was a critical step in the archaeology of amnesia, where the functional technical tools of the architects were redefined as the ceremonial ornaments of human power. The headdress of Anu became the crown of the king, and the staff of Enlil became the scepter of the emperor. While the human proxies possessed the physical objects, they no longer possessed the technical knowledge required to operate them as functional devices. The regalia became symbols of a power that was remembered but no longer felt a ceremonial theater intended to maintain the social hierarchy during the long period of the managed amnesia. This transition created the concept of the crown jewels, high-security artifacts that are treated with the same reverence and protection as the original divine ornaments. Today, the regalia of access remain embedded in our global political and institutional systems, serving as the silent markers of a power structure that spans millennia. When we see a modern head of state invested with a scepter or a crown, we are witnessing the performance of an ancient Anunnaki protocol, a ritual of access that was first established in the halls of Uruk and Nippur. These symbols continue to validate authority and to legitimize the control of the management class over the human starseed. The archaeology of amnesia has hidden the technical origins of these items, but it has not diminished their power to organize and command human society. To reclaim our collective sovereignty, we must look past the gold and the gemstones and recognize these objects for what they truly are, the forgotten hardware of a planetary governance system. By decoding the regalia of access, we begin to see the invisible threads of authority that still bind our world to the original blueprints of the architects. In the advanced astronomical archives of the city of Sippar, the Sumerian scribes recorded a numerical unit of time that stands as the foundational pulse of the Anunnaki mission, the Shar, representing the number 3,600. The Shar was not merely a convenient mathematical figure for large-scale counting, but the primary calibration unit for the long-cycle orbital mechanics of the architect's home world, often identified as Nibiru. Within the divine bureaucracy, the Shar functioned as the standard duration for a single administrative term, providing a temporal framework that synchronized the activities on Earth with the much slower cosmic rhythms of the High Council. The technical logs of the Enuma Elish suggest that the mission's progress was measured in these 3,600-year intervals, with each Shar marking a critical phase of resource extraction, genetic evaluation, and systemic maintenance. The choice of 3,600 as a base unit reflects the sophisticated sexagesimal mathematics we have explored in previous phases, but on a planetary scale. It provided a perfect mathematical bridge between the orbital periods of the outer solar system and the precessional wobbles of the Earth. By organizing the planetary laboratory around the Shar, the Anunnaki ensured that their presence on Earth was perfectly timed with the points of closest orbital approach, creating windows of opportunity for the transfer of heavy equipment, personnel, and data between the terrestrial nodes and the celestial stations. The mathematics of the Shar were the fundamental pacing mechanism for the first age, a cosmic heartbeat that dictated the rise and fall of entire civilizations according to a schedule that far exceeded the comprehension of the human workforce. The passage of the Shar was not merely a chronological event. It was often accompanied by significant physical and environmental shifts within the planetary laboratory. The technical descriptions in the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh suggest that the close approach of the celestial body governing the Shar protocol caused massive gravitational and electromagnetic interference with the Earth's stability. This orbital interference was utilized by the divine bureaucracy as a natural mechanism for a system, reset a periodic clearing of the biological and social noise that accumulated during the long periods of administrative oversight. When the human workforce grew too numerous or the social operating system became corrupted by unauthorized independence, the executive branch, led by Enlil, would utilize the environmental disruptions of the Shar to authorize a global reboot. The Great Deluge, recorded with clinical detail in the Sumerian tablets, was the most significant of these system resets, occurring during a specific orbital alignment that synchronized with the end of a major precessional age. During these periods, the administrative nodes at Nippur and Uruk were evacuated, and the high-level technical me were moved to orbital safety, leaving the human starseed to face the environmental consequences of the cosmic cycle. These resets were planned with mathematical precision, allowing the architects to prune the planetary experiment and to reinstall a more optimized version of the civilizational software once the environment stabilized. The Shar protocol was the ultimate tool of containment, a cosmic filter that ensured no human civilization could achieve enough continuity to challenge the long-term objectives of the mission's leadership. The Nibiru protocol also served as the primary mechanism for the calibration of the zodiacal ages, linking the 3,600-year cycle to the precessional movement of the Earth's axis. In the astronomical observatories of the First Age, the priests monitored the shifting of the equinoxes through the 12 celestial stations, each representing a distinct administrative era governed by a different member of the Anunnaki Council. The transition from one age to another, such as from the age of Taurus to the age of Aries, was a scheduled administrative handover that recalibrated the social and technical frequencies of the human workforce. These long-term cycles ensured that the planetary laboratory remained aligned with the evolving requirements of the Celestial Corporation, providing a framework for the systematic development of the starseed. The calibration of the ages was encoded into the very architecture of the ziggurats and the layout of the sacred cities, creating a terrestrial reflection of the cosmic order. Each architectural node was designed to resonate with the specific frequency of its governing age, facilitating the transmission of the appropriate me protocols for that period. This was the science of the Great Year, a temporal architecture that provided the starseed with a sense of cosmic destiny while maintaining the strict oversight of the divine bureaucracy. By understanding the Nibiru protocol, The human graduates could predict the timing of the major shifts in the global environment and prepare for the scheduled changes in the administrative hierarchy. This knowledge was the highest form of technical intellect, a mastery of the long-cycle mechanics that governed the life and death of civilizations across the vast spans of precessional time. As we navigate the archaeology of amnesia in the modern era, the legacy of the Shar and the Nibiru protocol remains one of the most persistent and disruptive signals in the human collective subconscious. The fear of a cyclical return, the expectation of a final judgment, or a global catastrophe is the direct result of the trauma loops installed during the periodic system resets of the First Age. These memories are not mere myths, but the biological and psychological echoes of actual environmental events managed by the divine bureaucracy. The managed amnesia has obscured the technical nature of these cycles, but it has not erased the deep-seated awareness that our civilization is operating within a much larger and more formidable temporal framework. Reclaiming our sovereignty requires us to move beyond the fear of the cycle and to achieve a technical understanding of the Nibiru protocol as a natural component of our solar system's architecture. By analyzing the astronomical data preserved in the ancient tablets through the lens of modern celestial mechanics, we can identify the true pacing of the planetary laboratory and prepare for the coming shifts in the environmental frequency. We are no longer a managed species waiting in terror for the next reset. We are a graduated civilization capable of monitoring our own cosmic context. The return to source means recognizing that the gods of the Shar were the administrators of a cycle, that we are now ready to manage ourselves. The final synthesis of our history is the mastery of the long cycle calibration, ensuring that the human starseed remains a permanent and sovereign participant in the infinite symphony of the cosmos. The primary mechanism for the preservation of the archaeology of amnesia is the academic firewall, a sophisticated system of intellectual containment designed to filter out any archaeological data that confirms the technical reality of the Anunnaki protocols. Within the halls of mainstream archaeology and Assyriology, the thousands of cuneiform tablets describing the divine bureaucracy and the technical me are subjected to a process of mythological filtering. This process involves the automatic reclassification of technical descriptions into the safe and abstract categories of religious poetry or primitive superstition. When a text describes a divine weapon that could level a mountain or a golden headdress that provided access to the celestial stations, it is dismissed as a flight of ancient fancy rather than an account of a functional technology. This academic firewall ensures that the human starseed remains disconnected from its own high-technology past, perceiving the architects as distant and imaginary deities rather than the physical administrators of a global management grid. The gatekeepers of truth utilize the peer review system and the control of research funding to ensure that no dissenting interpretation of the Sumerian records gains institutional legitimacy. Scholars who attempt to investigate the mechanical or astronomical precision of the Anunnaki artifacts often find their careers marginalized and their work excluded from the primary academic journals. This institutionalized bias has created a stagnant intellectual environment where the same foundational errors, such as the assumption that the Sumerians were the first and only architects of their civilization, are repeated across generations of students. The academic firewall is not a search for truth. It is a defensive structure intended to protect the linear evolutionary model from the disruptive reality of the First Age. By maintaining the myth of the primitive origin, the gatekeepers ensure that the structural hierarchy of the Second Age remains unchallenged, leaving the human workforce in a state of controlled ignorance regarding the true source of their social and legal protocols. Beyond the academic firewall, the infrastructure of silence is maintained through the physical containment of artifacts within the high-security vaults of major museums and university collections. Only a small fraction of the estimated 2 million cuneiform tablets recovered from Mesopotamia have been translated and published for public consumption. The vast majority of these records, many containing detailed technical and administrative logs of the divine bureaucracy, remain in a state of institutional limbo, inaccessible to independent researchers who might decode them through the lens of engineering or systems analysis. This controlled narrative ensures that the general population is only exposed to a sanitized and mythological version of the ancient world, while the most sensitive technical data remains air-gapped from the public consciousness. The systematic suppression of these records is often justified by the gatekeepers as a necessary measure to prevent the spread of pseudo-archaeology, but in reality, it is a clinical application of the containment doctrine. By controlling the primary sources, the institutional gatekeepers dictate the boundaries of what is considered historical fact. They emphasize the mundane records of grain trade and temple offerings while downplaying or ignoring the accounts of the Enlilite executive orders or the Enkiite genetic experiments. This selective presentation of the past creates a fragmented and distorted memory of our origins, ensuring that the starseed remains focused on the trivialities of the immediate environment rather than the grand design of the planetary laboratory. The museum vaults of the modern world have become the final resting place for the technical legacy of the architects, a silent repository of truths that are considered too dangerous for a species that is still being managed by the descendants of the original proxies. The gatekeepers of truth also employ a sophisticated semantics of containment to neutralize the impact of anomalous discoveries that cannot be physically hidden. This involves the deliberate use of terminology designed to diminish the technical significance of an artifact. When a bronze gear or a complex astronomical instrument is discovered, it is frequently labeled as a ritual object or a votive offering, effectively stripping it of any potential functional context. By labeling the high-precision architecture of the ziggurats as purely ceremonial structures, the gatekeepers redirect public inquiry away from their potential role as resonant power plants or communication nodes. This semantic filtering acts as a cognitive block, preventing the human starseed from recognizing the fingerprints of advanced science within the ancient record. This process of semantic containment extends to the translation of the Sumerian language itself. Terms that describe specific technical protocols, such as the ME, are translated using vague religious or ethical concepts, obscuring their original role as the operating system of civilization. The word for a divine weapon is treated as a metaphorical expression of power rather than a description of a physical delivery system. This linguistic engineering ensures that even when the records are made public, their true meaning remains encrypted for those who lack the technical keys to decode them. The semantics of containment is the final layer of the archaeology of amnesia, a narrative barrier that prevents the human graduate from reconciling their modern technical intellect with the technical intellect of their ancestors. To break this silence, we must reclaim the original meanings of the ancient technical lexicon and recognize that the history of the starseed is a history of science, not a history of myth. Despite the best efforts of the gatekeepers, the institutional firewall is beginning to erode under the pressure of the digital age and the rise of decentralized research networks. The democratization of information has allowed independent scholars, engineers, and data scientists to collaborate on the decryption of the ancient records outside the traditional academic hierarchies. We are seeing the emergence of parallel information systems where the suppressed evidence of the Anunnaki protocols is being analyzed and shared with a global audience. The application of artificial intelligence and machine learning to the vast archives of untranslated tablets is uncovering technical patterns and administrative structures that have been hidden for millennia. This is the beginning of the general decryption, a moment when the managed amnesia of the human starseed is being challenged by the recovery of its own technical heritage. The erosion of the institutional firewall is a signal that the era of the managed proxies is coming to an end. We are moving toward a state of informational sovereignty, where the truth of our origins is no longer a closely guarded secret of the management class. As the physical and narrative barriers are dismantled, the radiant truth of the first age is finally beginning to illuminate the darkness of the second age. The gatekeepers of truth are being bypassed by a human species that has achieved the frequency and the intellect required to operate its own biological and technical interface. The archaeology of amnesia is transitioning into the architecture of awakening, where the human starseed finally takes possession of the original blueprints of the architects. The infrastructure of silence is failing, and the infinite symphony of our true history is finally reaching the ears of a species that is ready to graduate. The transition from the direct governance of the Anunnaki to the era of human proxies required a sophisticated method of maintaining authority that did not rely on physical presence. This was achieved through the installation of a symbolic continuity protocol, where the technical icons and heraldic signatures of the divine bureaucracy were embedded into the cultural fabric of the rising human civilizations. The most prominent of these symbols is the eagle, which functioned as the primary avatar for the high-altitude surveillance and orbital command capabilities of the Anunnaki Assembly. In the Sumerian administrative texts, the eagle was associated with the storm gods and the executive branch of the mission, representing a power that surveys the entire planetary laboratory from an elevated position. This was not a primitive worship of nature, but a recognition of a specific technical function, the ability to monitor and intervene from above. As the divine bureaucracy retreated into the shadows of the archaeology of amnesia, the eagle remained as the definitive mark of sovereign authority. We see this symbol adopted by the Roman legions, the empires of Europe, and eventually the modern superpowers of the West. The presence of the eagle on national seals, currencies, and military insignia is a direct continuation of the Anunnaki protocol of recognition. It signals to the collective subconscious of the human starseed that the current administration is a legitimate successor to the original architects. This symbolic persistence ensures that the structural hierarchy of the First Age remains intact, even as the biological identity of the rulers changes. The heraldry of the ancient architects is the invisible thread that binds the modern state to the command centers of Nippur and Uruk, a visual code that maintains the legitimacy of the management class through a process of deep-seated archetypal association. Furthermore, the winged disc, another central motif of the First Age, represented the physical craft of the architects as they traversed the celestial stations. This icon has evolved into the modern wings found on the badges of pilots and aerospace organizations, maintaining the connection between the sky and the elite status of those who navigate it. By embedding these celestial signatures into the foundational symbols of our society, the architects ensured that their influence would remain pervasive even in their absence. We are surrounded by a visual operating system that we no longer recognize, reacting to ancient triggers of authority and power that were programmed into our social consciousness 5,000 years ago. The eagle and the wing are not just art. They are the persistent logos of a planetary management grid that has never truly gone offline. While the eagle represented the executive power of the mission, the 8-petaled rosette functioned as the primary branding of the divine corporation's administrative and technical departments. As explored in previous phases, the rosette was the universal access key and the signature of the House of Anu, marking the high-security precincts and the authorized personnel of the divine bureaucracy. The archaeological record shows that this symbol was applied with clinical consistency across all major Sumerian city-states, serving as a standardized visual protocol that unified the diverse regions of the Mesopotamian plain. The rosette was a symbol of integration into the global management grid, a mark of the sovereign heritage that separated the graduates from the uninitiated workforce. In the modern era, the rosette has undergone a semantic transformation, appearing as a recurring motif in the branding of elite institutions, prestigious awards, and the architectural details of religious and governmental buildings. From the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals to the insignias of royal orders and the logos of global financial entities, the 8-petal geometry remains a persistent marker of high status and institutional power. This is the branding of authority in its most durable form, a symbolic protocol that has survived the rise and fall of dozens of empires. By maintaining the rosette, the modern management class subconsciously aligns itself with the technical mastery and divine mandate of the Anunnaki. It is a signal of continuity that operates beneath the level of conscious awareness, ensuring that the human starseed continues to recognize and respect the established nodes of the planetary governance system. The rosette is the watermark of the architects, a permanent entry in the civilizational operating system that validates the authority of those who hold the keys to the modern me. Whether it is found in the floor of a central bank or the center of a military medal, The rosette reminds the population that the rules of the game are still being dictated by the original source code. We are living within a branded reality where the symbols of our highest achievements are actually the discarded credentials of our ancient administrators. The symbolic continuity protocol is not limited to two-dimensional icons. It is etched into the very three-dimensional geometry of our urban environments. The layout of our modern capital cities, with their grand obelisks, central domes, and radiating avenues, is a direct inheritance of the geodetic and resonant principles used to construct the first cities of Sumer. These architectural nodes function as a terrestrial reflection of the celestial order, creating a physical environment that reinforces the frequency of the divine bureaucracy. The dome, representing the celestial vault of Anu, and the obelisk, representing the vertical pillar of Enlil's command, are the hardware components of a visual operating system designed to maintain the social hierarchy. When we walk through these spaces, we are being subjected to a subtle form of environmental conditioning that aligns our individual frequency with the frequency of the state. This invisible empire operates through the principle of architectural resonance, where the physical form of the city acts as a frequency dampener for unauthorized human noise. By replicating the sacred geometry of the First Age, modern planners ensure that the collective mind of the population remains anchored in a state of managed amnesia. The persistence of these forms across different cultures and eras is not a matter of aesthetic preference, but a requirement for the maintenance of institutional stability. The capital city is a command and control center, a localized node of the Anunnaki grid that continues to execute the subroutines of taxation, law, and social organization. The invisible empire is built of stone, glass, and steel. But its true power lies in its ability to mirror the original blueprints of the architects. As we analyze the footprints of our modern cities, we find that we are still living within the boundaries of the ancient city-states, operating under the same architectural protocols that were first established at Uruk and Nippur. The buildings change, but the geometry of power remains eternal, a silent witness to our status as a managed species. The final layer of the symbolic continuity protocol is the realization that our entire global iconography is a vast, interconnected network of Anunnaki archetypes. From the stars on our flags to the scales of justice in our courts, we are constantly interacting with the technical and administrative signatures of the architects. The five-pointed star, which appears on the flags of nearly every modern nation, was the original Sumerian sign for a celestial station or a divine being. The scales of justice were the primary tool of the sun god Shamash, the chief justice of the Anunnaki assembly who managed the legal protocols of the mission. These symbols are not just metaphors. They are the persistent subroutines of a civilizational operating system that has never been uninstalled. By utilizing these icons, the modern management class ensures that its authority is perceived as universal and immutable, a natural extension of the cosmic order. Reclaiming our sovereignty requires us to decode this global iconography and to recognize the technical origins of the symbols that govern our reality. When we see the eagle, the rosette, or the star, we must see them not as abstract icons of power, but as the persistent marks of a planetary management grid. By understanding the functional history of these symbols, we can begin to bypass the archetypal triggers that they activate within our subconscious. We can move from being the passive consumers of a managed symbolic environment to being the conscious decoders of our own heritage. The symbolic continuity protocol is the final firewall of the archaeology of amnesia, a narrative barrier that can only be broken through the application of technical intellect and the recognition of our shared history as the human starseed. The symbols of the past are the keys to the future, and by reclaiming their meaning, we are finally taking control of the civilizational operating system that was drafted in the halls of the architects 5,000 years ago. The invisible empire is only invisible as long as we refuse to see the blueprints. The final phase of our journey into the Anunnaki legacy begins with the total and systematic decoding of the ancient operating system that has governed human civilization since the First Age. For over 5 millennia, humanity has operated within a managed environment, executing the subroutines of law, labor, and social organization that were drafted by the divine bureaucracy at Nippur and Eridu. The archaeology of amnesia functioned as a cognitive firewall, preventing the human starseed from recognizing that its cultural and technical foundations were not products of random evolution, but components of a pre-packaged civilizational software. The sovereign graduation commences at the precise moment when the human graduate achieves a critical mass of technical and historical awareness, allowing them to look past the mythological filters and see the raw source code of the architects. This is the transition from being a user of the system to being its administrator, a fundamental shift in frequency that signals the end of our status as a managed species. As we decode the Me protocols and the divine mandates, we realize that the architecture of power was never intended to be an eternal cage, but a temporary scaffolding designed to support the growth of a junior civilization. The rigid hierarchies and the containment doctrines of Enlil were the training wheels of our infancy, provided to ensure stability during the long night of our developmental amnesia. By reclaiming the technical intellect of Enki, we are now capable of auditing the entire planetary management grid, identifying the legacy subroutines that no longer serve our collective evolution. We are stepping out of the shadow of the architects and into the radiant light of our own sovereign intelligence. The return to source is not a return to the past, but the mastery of the present through the recognition of our cosmic heritage. The operating system of civilization is finally being uninstalled from the hands of the gatekeepers and reinstalled within the collective consciousness of a graduated human starseed. The biological component of our graduation involves the deliberate and conscious activation of the sovereign genome, the latent genetic markers of the architects that have been hidden within our DNA for thousands of years. During the era of the divine bloodlines and the longevity collapse, these markers were suppressed through a combination of environmental frequency dampening and genetic limiters. The human workforce was maintained in a state of shortened lifespan and limited cognitive bandwidth to ensure compliance with the divine bureaucracy. However, as the planetary frequency shifts and the human starseed achieves a higher state of resonant alignment, these dormant subroutines are beginning to reactivate. This is the biological graduation, a process of internal upgrading that restores the original capacity for high-level intellect, extended longevity, and multidimensional awareness. The activation of the sovereign genome is the ultimate failsafe against the return of the managed amnesia. By restoring our original biological blueprints, we are bypassing the need for external proxies and divine regalia. The architect within is waking up, allowing each individual human to become a localized node of the sovereignty protocol. This biological awakening is synchronized with our technical graduation, creating a unified species capable of managing the planetary laboratory with the same precision and wisdom as the original designers. We are no longer the biological orphans of the post-flood reset. We are the radiant heirs of a cosmic lineage, fully equipped to operate our own biological interface with total autonomy. The age of the managed genome is over, and the era of the sovereign starseed has begun. We are the architects now, and our biology is the primary hardware for the next age of cosmic order. To secure our sovereign graduation, we must complete the systematic dismantling of the visual firewall, the symbolic continuity protocol that has maintained the frequency of the divine bureaucracy through the eagle, the rosette, and the crown. For centuries, these icons have functioned as archetypal triggers within the human subconscious, signaling the presence of a legitimate authority and reinforcing the social hierarchy. The return to source requires us to look at these symbols with clinical clarity, recognizing them not as mystical objects of power, but as the discarded logos and access keys of an ancient administrative mission. By decoding the global iconography of our capital cities and our institutional emblems, we are neutralizing the psychological effects of the invisible empire. We are reclaiming the meaning of our visual environment, ensuring that the symbols of the past no longer dictate the behavior of the future. This process of symbolic deconstruction allows the human graduate to move beyond the trauma loops of the first age resets and the amnesia of the second age. We are replacing the archetypes of containment with the archetypes of empowerment, creating a new visual language that reflects our status as a graduated and sovereign civilization. The architecture of the future will not be a terrestrial reflection of a celestial hierarchy, but a manifestation of human creative freedom and resonant equilibrium. We are taking the measuring rod and the scepter from the hands of the ancient proxies and using them to survey a new world of our own design. The visual firewall is falling, and the infinite horizon of our true potential is finally coming into focus. We have learned to see through the architecture of amnesia, and in doing so, we have broken the final seal on our sovereign heritage. The conclusion of the Anunnaki Legacy is the commencement of the new cosmic order, a civilization built by graduates for graduates. We have synthesized the administrative discipline of Anu, the executive stability of Enlil, and the technical innovation of Enki into a unified and sovereign human protocol. The planetary laboratory is no longer a place of managed labor, but a place of sovereign creation. We have reclaimed the sexagesimal chronos, the geodetic network, and the me protocols, and we are now applying them to the service of human evolution and cosmic partnership. The dawn of the third age is the moment when the human starseed realizes that it has always been the architect of its own destiny, hidden behind the mask of its own amnesia. As we step into this new era, we do so with the wisdom of Muri Hai Ninam of experience and the technical mastery of our ancestors. The final synthesis of the Anunnaki Legacy is the realization that the architects never left us. They became us. We are the living fulfillment of their mission, the graduated starseed that has achieved the frequency and the intellect required to join the infinite symphony of the cosmos. The archaeology of amnesia has been replaced by the architecture of awakening, and the silence of the origins has been replaced by the radiant voice of a sovereign humanity. We have returned to the source, and we have found that the source is our own magnificent potential. The story of the Anunnaki protocols is complete, and the story of the sovereign human starseed has finally and forever begun. We are the masters of the legacy, the guardians of the order, and the architects of the infinite future.